continue a tradition of mine to have a brief members meeting lasting no more than 2 or 3 minutes, but this meeting is particularly important. First, I'd like to mention some upcoming events in town. We are going to be exercising our democratic wings this week with the beginning of town meeting on Wednesday. I urge all citizens to go to town meeting and vote your conscience, bring a neighbor who may not be able to drive there, and be well represented for the town of Sudbury. Also, in June, our upcoming annual meeting comes up where we do our annual election of officers. The nominating committee is busy right now nominating and prospective trustees and members for the upcoming meeting. It'd be nice to see a good amount of people for that meeting. It should be very entertaining, and you can pick up a program on your way outside today as you leave the building and put your name tags back. We're also happy to see everyone wearing name tags. That is a sign that our new membership initiative is working. You should also have received in the mail a membership card telling you how long you've been a member and when your membership expires. If you haven't and you have paid your dues, please let us know so we can take measures to make sure you get your card soon. Well, let's see. I'd also like to exercise some wings of the presidency in honoring a couple of people. You know, when you have a program like we've been having the last 2 or 3 programs with full houses as today, it sort of highlights the need to be able to reach the crowds and reach those people that are interested in our history and important facts related thereto. And people go unsung heroes such as Peggy Fredrickson. She's this year's treasurer, and she is our technology director, and she sits behind this black box here and working with Channel 8 make sure that the program is filmed in a smooth and educational and entertaining way. So I thought we could all just give her a quick round of applause. Thank you, Peggy. Also at this time, if you were in attendance last month's program, you heard that Ursula Lyons did resign as trustee, not as an active participating member, but as trustee. And the trustees, the board, wanted to do something special for Ursula. She's done so much for the town of Sudbury over the years and so much for the Historical Society. And we put our hats together and had some shopping fun. And Lee is bringing up a couple of gifts for Ursula. And I'm sure Ursula will stand up and accept them gracefully. Thank you. Just to let you know. It's very coincidental. Ursula, there's a wonderfully framed map of the map that we offer for sale for members and anyone who's interested in this historic map, as well as a leather-bound traveler's journal that we thought might be useful for you and Frank when you're traveling. Unfortunately, we didn't get it to you in time for your Florida visit, but I'm sure you'll be able to fill the pages soon. She has not, please. Thank you. I think she needs some applause. And we're going to briefly pause now while the technology people do their thing, and I'll get a signal, and we'll begin today's program, and Ursula will be introducing the speaker after I say a few words. So we're all set. Now, yes, Ursula is reminding us that 2 months ago we did a program on the Barns of Sudbury, and Peggy, in her hat as technology director, has made a wonderful CD with images and the names and locations of all the barns that she was able to do a pictorial documentation of. And they're available for sale at the sales table today. Today's program is a very, very important program for citizens of Sudbury. And I wanted to just introduce today's topic before Ursula introduces our speaker with a quote from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's Tales of the Wayside Inn that I hope all of you have a copy of in your personal library. It starts, "As ancient is this hostelry as any in the land may be, built in the old colonial day, when men lived in a grander way, with ampler hospitality. The Society strives to bring programs to you in a hospitable and educational way. Today, Ursula Lyons, our Trustee of the Month, is going to introduce our speaker for today's program. Thank you, Ursula.
It gives me especially great pleasure to introduce my next-door neighbor for 5 days of the week, Rich Natowski. Actually, he's 7 days of the week because he's the next house over on Wayside Inn Road. And we've known each other for about 27 years, ever since he came to the Wayside Inn and has been the miller. And I'm just thrilled to have him bring his slides today, and especially to learn more about the area where I've been living for 30 years. Rich has had experience in the society. Actually, he's a past president of the Sudbury Historical Society and trustee. He's been an interpreter and a researcher at the Sleepy Hollow Restoration in Tarrytown, New York, and that was specializing in early American agriculture and in blacksmithing and milling. He attended the Cooperstown, New York graduate program in American folk culture and history museum studies. He holds membership in the Society for Industrial Archaeology, the Association for Living Historical Farms and Agricultural Museums, and the Society for the Preservation of Old Mills. And Rich is not just a miller, he's an historian who's been spending his off-season doing research on mills and other historical aspects of the Wayside Inn. So, ironically, I brought this to show you. The reason I brought this is because we sell these. First of all, the reason I brought this is because the Society has these for sale, either framed or unframed. And this map is an 1875 De Beers map of Sudbury with a little bit of Maynard. And up in the top is an insert of the area around the grist mill. And I just thought it was the perfect introduction, but I think Kirsten's introduction was better. So without further ado, I'd like Rich to come up, and we'll put the lights down.
You also stole my thunder, Ursula, because I have a slide of that. A few months ago, Ursula initially called me and asked me if I wanted to do a talk on mills. And the thought of talking about mills again for 27 more years just that didn't thrill me. And so I had to think of something I thought might be worthwhile. Any feedback, please? Well, what I thought about is something which people always ask me about. Who owns the Wayside Inn? What owns the, what is the Wayside Inn? Where is the Wayside Inn? Because everyone who comes to the mill wants to know, well, what is the Wayside Inn? Did Longfellow live here? What is that place over there? No. Did they use that to store cannonballs during the Revolution? You'll find out more about this. Well, one lady came and said, well, gee, when did they put the steel water wheel in? And I said, well, the mill was only built in 1929. She goes, I remember when it was wooden. So there are a lot of questions. The mill was only built in 1929, and she remembers, well, anyway, it never happened. And there's no reason why they should know the answers to all these questions, because if you go around the property, there is no signage. So essentially what this is my way of filling in the blanks. And I've done that. But when I told Ursula how many slides I had, she fainted. And so I was able to pare it down to 96. So your ability to get out of here in 45 minutes to an hour depends on how many questions you ask and all that. Well, anyway, I have to make an apology ahead of time. My 34-year-old camera broke down, and as a result, I had to take pictures with a less than perfect lens and camera. So if you cannot see it, blame the camera, not me, please. Okay. Now, first of all, what is the Wayside Inn? Well, let me read you some excerpts from the this piece of paper, which says, "The Wayside Inn Trust Incorporation." Okay, and it says, "As Henry Ford aged, it became increasingly impossible for him to maintain his participation in the affairs of the Wayside Inn, and on November 2nd, 1944, much of the responsibility for management passed into the hands of a newly formed corporation whose mandate reads, quote, 'The purposes for which this corporation is formed are as follows: for scientific, educational, and charitable purposes exclusively, and insofar as it may be necessary for the transaction of its affairs, as in these purposes described, to raise money in any manner as provided by law, including the right to apply for licenses to sell alcoholic beverages, and to use and exercise all the powers conferred by the present or future laws, blah, 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 Commonwealth of Massachusetts, upon charitable corporations, but only for carrying out the scientific, educational, and charitable purposes.'" So essentially, what the Wayside Inn is an historic site. It is not owned by anyone in the traditional sense. It is simply technically owned by the Board of Trustees for the education of the public. Following the fire and restoration of the inn in 1957 to 58, the Ford Foundation, which had maintained the corporation, turned over trusteeship to the National Trust for Historic Preservation, which in turn transferred control to the current Wayside Inn Trust and Corporation in 1960. The basic nature of the operation, however, remained and remains unchanged. Now, what I hope to show you are things which I have been looking at for a number of years. I hope they aren't too trivial. Some are very insignificant looking, but in the total scheme of things, I hope you find them interesting. Okay. Yeah. Ton? Now, one of the first things you might be confused about is the date of the first license to operate Howe's Tavern. A traveler came through in 1853, and he wrote, "Left our horse at the Howe Tavern. The oldest date on the sign is DH 1716. We also have the application for the first license. So if you see 1683 and 1686 on the sign, well, David Howe is 9 and 12 years old, respectively, in those dates. 1716 should be the date. A few decades ago, I, in naive enthusiasm, went to an official, breathlessly showing him this quote. Oh, by the way, this is from Thoreau. And the person, when I told him about this, said, "Oh, well, Thoreau was a ne'er-do-well, never had a full-time job." So you can understand how it's difficult for people to change their ways after maybe a century of the incorrect information. Ton? This is a early sketch by Alfred Bellows. And this is our first image of what we have of the Wayside Inn. Ton? This is a painting done by Thomas Hill. He was a Hudson River School painter. This was done in 1870, a number of years ago. The Wayside Inn purchased this painting at an extravagant price. I show it to you because it is another early image and a fairly accurate image. This is looking from the west. And of interest to me, I'm interested in agriculture, as Ursula mentioned. You see this ox cart? It's led by a horse. And this is fairly typical in those days for ox to be led by horses because horses are a little smarter and faster. And I don't really know the color. This is autumn foliage. It looks like it has a mild reddish hue to it. Ton. This is another western view. I included this because there is one reference to the fact that this wing over here was once a carriage barn, but in Ezekiel Howe's will, he refers to this as his new kitchen and the upstairs as his chambers, which have been bed chambers. This area now is what you all know as the 1800 ballroom, and that's the tap room. color you can't tell from this. However, Ton, will focus, please, if you can. Well, okay, no, back. This is, okay. This is hanging in the library. This was painted by Stern, the town historian. Hudson, I'm sorry. And you can see that color is definitely not red. We have references in our archives referring to the color as, you know, mousy gray, brown. This is sort of almost an ochre yellow, which was a very, very common paint at the time. Now, with regards to the term Red Horse Tavern, Isaiah Thomas, the noted Worcester printer, came through in 1820. He said the horse on the sign was black. So there is a lot of ambiguity, which is fine. Ton? A little focus there if you can. I think it's... Okay. No, back. Okay. Another early image. In particular, I want you to pay attention to this woodshed is now the Ford room. And for many years, we have a lot of old photographs, a lot of paintings. This eastern building here, we don't really know much about. It is apparently an old building that was added on, a very humble building too, if you look at the timbers in it. Now it contains the old kitchen and the innkeeper's room, and above are rooms 9 and 10, two very popular rooms. Note in particular the awning on it. Ton. Now, if pressed, it's pressing very hard. This is my favorite photograph. This was first brought to my attention by Lee Swanson. It's in our archives. This is looking from the south, looking down what I call Lyman's Lane. And notice there are at least 2 barns here. That's the Wayside Inn right there. Now, I call this Lyman's Lane because, I forget the exact date now, because about 15 years ago I found information in Massachusetts archives which said that in, I think it was 1846, if memory serves me correct, Lyman Howe petitioned the town of Framingham to build a road to meet his road at the Framingham-Sudbury line. This, as I hope you'll see in a later photograph, was known as Wayside Inn Road, not that road out front. It began at the front door of the inn. And it also points to the fact that the Howes were very, very prosperous farmers. Well, I shouldn't say prosperous farmers, but in the 1798 tax assessment, which was levied on everyone in America, in fact, it was the first direct tax, the Wayside, Adam Howe had probably the 3rd or 4th largest land owning in Sudbury. And he made his money by farming, largely. Also, shortly after, about 1848, he and several of the farmers, he was the head, petitioned the town to build what is now Dutton Road. Now I say this because people often wondered, I shouldn't say wondered, people often wrote down that Lyman was a fairly improvident tavern keeper. I mean, he was the last of the Howes, and when he died, he was broke. In fact, in debt. And one reference refers to the fact that he may have been drinking too much. I don't know about that, but I have some other ideas. Ton? Here's another view of the barn. This, from about here on out, was removed, probably during Ford's time, or maybe just before Ford's time. So the barn that's there now is greatly truncated. Ton? Remember I told you about Lyman's Lane being Wayside Inn Road? There's the sign, and that's what it says. It starts the front and goes into Framingham. And you can see it's a shingle barn now, and this area here no longer exists. Ton? That's another view. Again, the barn that you saw was extended this far out. Now this little building there, according to Lee Swanson's research, was that a pump house? This little building you researched? Remember the little building next to the barn? No, this little... spring house. Yeah, Lebanon was advertising he had the purest water in the area, and we found out some information in the archives pointing to that fact it was a spring house. The underground thing he was talking about was what I call a pumice pit for root crops thrown in the subterranean chambers for feeding cattle. Ton?
Is that spring still produced, Rich?
No, it's dried up. Well, yeah, I haven't seen anything. We have a little focus on that, Ton? Okay, well, no, back. Okay, oh, no, back. A little more. A little more. No. We try. That's good. Thanks. That was good. Aerial photograph I did in the late 80s, and I'm just trying to give you an idea of what is there. Much of this land obviously did not belong to the house. For instance, Carding Mill Pond. Most of this here was hay meadows that was owned by the Parmenter family. And the barn I mentioned in Lyman's Lane is here. Here is Route 20, which Ford built and gave to the state. This here is naturally Wayside and Road. This is, you may call it Hop Brook now. Kurt Garfield and I like to think about the origin, the name of this, because I have an old map, you may have seen it, and this part of the brook was known as Snake Brook. And as it goes down parallels Dutton Road, it does meander quite a bit. However, if you want to know why it's called Snake Brook, perhaps you should come to the mill early one morning in warm weather, and the common northern water snakes are out in great numbers, about yay big. The fence I built for them in front of the water wheel, they use as a sort of a refuge, and people come there quite often just to look at the snakes. There is the Martha Mary Chapel that Ford built. In the woods is the Redstone Schoolhouse. The inn is naturally there. Gatehouse is here. And in a map, which I will show you, a land plan, which they registered in 1848, this here was known as a hog pasture. I guess it's appropriate since I live there. But the wonderful thing about this is that it tells you exactly what the land was used for. It's really a marvelous document that we have. Ton? I told you about the hay meadows. There it is. This was done in the early part of the century. This is a photograph by obviously a photograph. This is done by a man named Clifton Church who sold Ford his photographs. And they are just wonderful photographs. And it shows you hay meadows. Here's Snake Brook. Doesn't look like it's flowing very much, but before Marlborough put their sewage treatment in there, this was a much smaller brook. However, Snake Brook throughout history has had at least 5 mills on it. I mention that because, a number of years ago, Marlborough was getting irritated about the fact that we wanted them to clean up their water. You've ever heard this, you know about the phosphate problems. And they said, well, if we take our sewage treatment plant away, you won't have any water in the brook at all. And I told one person, heck, throughout history, there have been 5 mills on this stream, so it can't lack for water too much. Ton? There is the land plan I told you about. There is where the Wayside Inn is. This here was Route 20, Boston Post Road, went right by the inn. There's Lyman's Lane. Tom, can you sharpen it up a little bit? No, other way? Okay, that's it. That's it. There's Dutton Road, it's called the Town Road. Some other interesting things. This is field and pasture. Now, the term pasture is very specific. Pasture was not meadow. Meadow was much more fertile. Pasture was generally grazing land and was not such good land. But often, sometimes you had land which was overused and it became pasture. Interesting from the point of view of historic agriculture. This is is called an ox pasture. This is basically just downstream from the mill. This is Mill Meadow. This is alongside Wayside and Road. This was an excellent piece of the land. And there's Parmenter pasture. This is where the chapel now is. And, well, some other interesting comments and notes here. This is rocky pasture. There's clover piece and flagpole. This is roughly where Route 20 and Wayside and Road meet. Clover piece and flagpole. Piece and flagpole. That's a very interesting thing. And they have things like chestnut pasture, swamp and sheep pasture, things like that. Ton. And just the corner of Route 20 and Wayside Road is the Adam Howe Jr. house. Privately owned now, naturally. Now, this has a classical revival front, but somewhere in our archives there was a photograph of this before this was added on, probably in the colonial revival period in the late 1800s, early 1900s. But in that place dwelt Adam Howe Jr., who, along with his brother Lyman Howe, owned the property until he tragically died, I believe, of consumption in 1856, something like that. Ton. Now, after Lyman Howe's death, the tavern ceased being, I call it a tavern, the inn ceased being the inn, an inn, excuse me. It was leased to a tenant farmer. Does anyone recognize that room? Sad. However, the old bar, still is the old bar, you all recognize it. And as far as that modern convenience, Lyman Howe died intestate, and there's a marvelous inventory of his estate. And he had 5 wood stoves, iron stoves, in his premises. So when you look at all the fireplaces, that obviously is something people wanted to get rid of, because as you probably know, fireplaces were basically for cooking, and most of the heat went up them. And research has been done showing that in a farmhouse in the middle of winter time with a fire roaring, the middle of the room might be 50-odd degrees, that's all. Okay, Ton? A little more clear, if you can, a little focus, please. No? Okay, that's it. Why did the inn die? People talk about the railroad taking away traffic. That has a great deal of merit. I think temperance also should be mentioned. This is the bar, but if you look at this, there's nothing refreshingly alcoholic about it. I happen to like the crab apple tonic. I'd like to try that. Bill's sparkling tonics, ginger ale, root beer, blood orange, strawberry, sarsaparilla, etc. But there is a fire frame there, and if you want to get a better look at one, the Hosmer House has one. Ton? If you see, folks a little better, Ton? Okay. Now, I mentioned temperance. This is a marvelous watercolor done by the fairly well-known artist, David Claypool Johnson, called the Militia Muster. And what it points to is the fact that a lot of these musters were, well, let's say they were lacking in discipline. You have to see this. I mean, there's one man poking another man in the butt with a bayonet. This man just put his butt of his rifle down on someone's foot. He skewered someone's cap. They are in a state of inebriation or clumsiness, as opposed to the colonel there. It looks like a fop. Next, please, Ton. And usually very often these ended in, battles amongst the, I shouldn't say often did, but it was a good source of inspiration for this man. There's a gun going off, taking off that man's hat. Well, if you take a close-up of this, you'll find it very amusing. Ton. Now, temperance became, starting in the 1820s, a very difficult thing to deal with. A lot of tavern keepers and people in general didn't want it because it hurt business. I don't know if the Wayside Inn had that problem, but what a lot of people did is to overcome the prohibitions on drinking, is they basically took a pig, painted its stripes, and told people if they wanted to see it, they could pay admission, and at the same time they could get a drink. So they weren't selling drinks in a tavern, they were giving him something for seeing the striped pig. There's a devil up there, and he's having a good time with this. And they all have something to say. But like Prohibition in the early 20th century, this eventually petered out. Ton? This is a photograph of people standing next to one of the famous trees that Louis Agassiz thought might be 1,000 years old. Now, I like to point out Louis Agassiz because he was one of the famous people who visited it. Who was he? He was the father of glacial theory. He was the one that theorized that what caused the differences in the various landscapes was umpteen thousand years ago, 14, 12, what have you. A mountain of ice, sometimes a mile high, descended, and when it receded, we have the landscape we have now. Well, anyway, he visited the inn, and this is one of the trees he commented on. Ton? There's one of the trees, and it's held up only by some concrete that they poured in the middle. It's alive. Across the street is the gatehouse, carriage house. Now, it was called the gatehouse because it used to be on the other side of the road. That is the side of the road that the inn is on. If I'm in your way, please tell me, okay? Okay. And what's interesting about it is this overhang. That's very typical of 17th century dwellings and early 18th century dwellings. This was built around 1908 by Lemon, and initially was a gatehouse. Tom? I left out one. Can you go to the next one? Uh-oh, go back to? I don't know what happened to it. Okay, here it is on the same side of the road as the inn, and literally this is a passageway that led you onto Lemon's estate. When it was moved over, okay, it was all boarded up, and this became actually a residence for Ford's little fire engine. And it was basically used by workers who lived on the, it was inhabited by workers who lived at the inn, who worked at the inn. Ton? Here's the old kitchen. Probably during Lemon's time, he's the one that added the paneling because this used to be a much bigger fireplace. We have a reference by one of the people who visited in the late 1800s that it was big enough for a person to sit in. Now, Lee, you told me that originally, and at first I was a little incredulous, but it's true. And it's considerably smaller now, although it's certainly not small. And in this photograph, we see it has 2 beehive ovens. Later on, this was changed. I don't know why. Ton? Go back one. Back. Back. You going back or forward? Back? No, he's going. He's going back? Something's wrong. Back. Oh, you're going forward now. Something that does that. Excuse me. My fault. I'm wrong. He likes me to be wrong. Just a view showing some electric cars. And next. A good thing that happened during Lemon's time, besides the fact he put a lot of money into the inn, is during his time, Route 20 was moved from in front of the inn to out here. A big help. And what Lemon did is to add the dormer windows. Remember before the woodshed? That now became attached to the inn. Ton. And what is now the innkeeper's room, don't know what it was before, was fixed up by Lemon in a very nice way. Next. When Ford took over the place, he paneled it and changed the nature of it quite a bit. Ton. Henry Ford, a giant of the machine age. As you know, he owned the property from 1923 until his death in 44. Ton. And speaking of roads, probably the best thing he did was build that stretch of Route 20, which he gave to the state. There are some workers obviously laying it out. 28, I believe he finished it. Yeah. There's a date on the overpass or the underpass, and it says 1928. He gave it to the state, and I think they gave him $1 for it or $10, and they say he never cashed the check. Ton? I forget. Lee, do you remember the cost? Huh? 180,000. Again, this is my camera. This again shows Route 20. Ton. The reason he did that is because he was told that all the vibration of the traffic going by was going to hurt the inn. That was just one of the reasons. And among other things, what he did is added the north wing on. This is now the main dining room that you all know of. Upstairs are now guest rooms 1 to 8, overnight rooms. This used to be a ballroom. Ton. He greatly restored the inn. You can see the workers restoring the east wing, what is now the old kitchen. Ton. Now here's an aerial photograph, which this is Wayside and Road. Here's the inn there. I want you to pay, this is Dutton Road, and I want you to focus on that there. That's Carding Mill Dam. Before Ford came here, according to Forrest Bradshaw, there was a little ice harvested around here, and there's a photograph showing a little pond here. But Ford built this dam, and if you recall those hay meadows I showed you, all these hay meadows were soon to be flooded. Ton. And there it is, Carding Mill Pond filling up. What was once hay meadow is now, marshes and swamps. Okay, Ton. Another aerial photograph. Again, there it is, all full of water. This is the east field where we used to have a gardener, John Botello, who used to do quite a bit of work there. And very nice photograph. Now, I hope the next one will focus on this area there. Ton? No. Okay. I hope someone will ask the town to do something about this. This is a nice 10-foot Fitz overshot water wheel, which has been rusting in front of the carding mill, or now just to the side, ever since Arden McNeil bought this, probably in the late 60s or early 70s. They say the nuts and bolts are stainless, but that's not going to help. The rest of the thing is slowly going to be dust. And it's in decent shape, and if they advertise it, they can get some money for it, because it's not going to be used. It's a real nice wheel. Oh, well. Ton? Anybody recognize this? This is Ford's Folly. For providing water to the boys' school and the inn for fire protection purposes and possibly for drinking, Ford built this very large fieldstone dam up near Knobscott Hill. And this is when it's being constructed. It had a leak in it. Now, a number of years ago, I talked to Forrest Bradshaw, and he said he was the water commissioner at the time, and he said one time he paid a visit to the site and came to the downside of the dam, and he said water was percolating up through the soil from beneath the dam. He went to the engineer and said, "Why are you building this dam here?" And the engineer said, "Look, I was told to build a dam here," and they did. Ton. But it did hold water, although it was not safe. There it is. Ton. Now, I have an engineer friend. He suggested maybe one of the reasons it didn't hold water is because it was built on a fairly poor terrain. Those talus boulders do not make for very good dam foundations. Ton. This is an advertisement in the Fitz Water Wheel Company catalog showing the mill. I got to say just a few things about the mill. The reason it's a stone mill is because the man who designed it was not Henry Ford. I mean, Ford gave them money, but he hired a hydraulic engineer from Philadelphia named John Blake Campbell. John Blake Campbell was from the Delaware River Valley, Philadelphia, and in the late 1600s, the English who came to that area from the North Midlands of England used stone. If you recall, you look at an old house around Massachusetts and they're all made of wood because the people who came to Massachusetts Bay from East Anglia used wood. But that's not wood, and it's stone because the man who designed it was from Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. Ton. There he is there. This is taken 1970. The man next to him was a man who welded the rim on the wheel. After a number of years, it was rusting seriously. And Campbell, who was known for over-engineering, instead of putting 1/8-inch steel on that sole, on that water wheel, he put 1/4-inch steel on. That's as good a water wheel as you'll ever see. And if you want specifics on that, come to the mill and I'll tell you about it. I talked to him when he came to the mill in '77. He was 88 years old. Drove up to 95 in his old 55 Chevrolet. Interesting person. Ton. Next. There's Ursula's map. This shows the grist mill, and there's the original site of David Howe's grist mill. Later, they added a shoe nail and tack mill onto it. There were other buildings there, an ice house, a wood shed. There's a barn there, which you will see in a while. This is where Ursula and Frank Lyons live. And across there was Calvin Howe's house. And this, I don't know who lived there, but there was a dwelling there. And we have, the foundation's still there. Focus a little bit. There's that's it. That's an aerial photograph. Okay, here's the mill stream leading to the present mill. This is where the Howe grist mill was and shoe nail and tack mill. There's the emergency overflow. And here's the original mill stream. The first stream you cross when you come onto the mill is the original mill stream. There's Wayside End Road. Okay? Ton. And there's Calvin Howe, and there's the shoe nail and tack mill. The old grist mill is there. The dam is here. Ton. We'll focus. Okay. Now, when Ford came, he raised the dam 2 feet. There's the Calvin Howe barn. That's quite a structure. Now, leads me to speculate as to why the Wayside Inn under Lyman Howe's, and why the Howes did not succeed after Lyman's time, besides the fact Lyman didn't have any children. According to a study done in 1841, by a minister by the name of Coleman, it was the first of 4 reports. He had strong doubts about any profit from milk that had to be sold at 3 cents to a milk dealer by a small farmer with only 4 to 6 cows. Well, Lyman Howe had 4 to 6 cows, and he was selling milk at about 3 cents a gallon. So that was one of the reasons he failed. He simply couldn't produce it cheap enough. Well, that sounds familiar to us today, small farmers disappearing for one reason or another. Okay. Well, anyway, they were digging this out a little bit more and laying a channel to go to the pipe, which we use to help keep water down. Ton. What he did by raising the level of water 2 feet is he allowed some water to go into the back area of the pond. This here is a stone wall. It's still there. This was all dry land. Okay? And believe me, every time it rains, I bite my nails a lot. Because it's a lot of water and it's very shallow. Ton. And there's the site of Calvin Howe's dairy barn. What's the oldest object on the property? How old do you think that boulder is? I know this might not interest you, but I'm interested in geologic history. Anyone have any idea? 100 million. That's over 600 million years old. It's bedrock and originated at the South Pole. A well-known geologist told me about that. He came by. I was interested in glacial erratics and boulder fields on the property, which I point out to visitors. And he walked by that. He took his little glass out and examined the crystal, and he said, "This is bedrock." And he said, "I'm really a bedrock man." The man was James Skeen. He's head of the Western Observatory and teaches at Boston College. And he has a book out about roadside geology. Very nice man. Ton. Here's a view. It's a bad photograph, but there is the grist mill, the old Howe grist mill. There's Calvin Howe's house. Hugh. There's Calvin Howe's house now. They had a fire. It used to be it used to be a boys' dormitory during Ford's time. And I wish you could see this more closely. The barn is there, but that building is a corn barn or granary. Hugh? And Sturbridge Village has about 2 of them. It was on stone pillars, and it was to help keep rodents away. And these boards are slightly ventilated space so the grain would not get rotten. But that's where millers used to store a lot of grain. And I just think it's a wonderful structure. Now, this is most curious. It's a note from Mr. William Hager, who owned the Hager sawmill, where the country store is now, to Buckley Howe, okay, and its indebtedness to grinding 10 hundredweight of plaster. Here it is, 15 hundredweight of plaster. The Howe mill at one time was grinding something like gypsum. There wasn't any limestone in this area, but they could have gotten it from western Massachusetts. And he was grinding something for making plaster. So, a little interesting little thing there. And there were quite a few other comments. Hugh? Now, mills. This is a cider mill that was purchased by Henry Ford in southern New Hampshire. Okay. I found out where by a man who said it was his father who sold it to Henry Ford. Ford brought it down here, restored it. I guess the timbers are what he wanted most of all. About 1970, Ben Walker Jr. Restored the roof. The timbers inside are in marvelous shape. However, nothing else is in that ton. The machinery in it, we have some pieces. We have some wooden screws. We have some drain boards. And we have other equipment which would have resembled the cider mill at Sturbridge Village. This would have been a wonderful thing to open to the public. Ton. There it is when Ford had it restored. Grist mills in the background. You can see this from the road, and everyone asks what it is. Well, I'll show you the next one. Ton. Okay. All the boards here have feathered edges. When they restored it, they did a very nice job. The foundation timbers, they're all rotting out. The place is being vandalized. A few years ago, we had, well, the kid's been carving the initials on, but this is you can read. I don't want to repeat it. It just makes me mad. The person was so thoughtful that his number on the thing, and his girlfriend, they haven't been able to find him yet. Anyway, that's what's happening. It'll soon fall down. There's nothing much left to hold it up. Ton. Now, I have an appeal to make. If any of you know anyone who would like to take this coach, this is in the barn, and restore it for your own purpose, contact the trustees. I mean, this is in terrible shape. You know what that is. The birds live in here. It's an old school sleigh. May have been used in Sudbury. I haven't been able to document it. Barge, they call it also. Those are just some grindstones someone gave me. But we would like to find a home for it. Please. Ton. Oh, I'm not authorized to say that, but I can't stand to see it falling apart. Here is the cooling plant. Now, when I arrived, I heard people asking me, well, people asked me if this was used for storing cannonballs during the Revolution. They wanted to know if it was used for as part of the Underground Railway. Now, these are all valid questions because, like I said, there's no information. Long time ago, there was a group of well-dressed people standing there looking there, and I went over and asked them if I could help them. And they said, oh, no, we're just looking at the old jail. This is an impressive structure. It was built primarily, don't call it a root cellar, please. It's a fruit cellar, not a root cellar. It's too damp for root crops. It was used primarily for storing apples. They also want to cultivate, and perhaps did, mushrooms in there. It's sizable, about a half an acre. Lee, quarter acre. And one man said you could put a 5-story building on that. This is just downstream from the mill. This is Snake Brook. Wayside, you drive toward the inn from the west, you can't miss that. Well, if I try to keep it uncovered, but you? There are the men starting to dig it out. Oh, this, every time I look at this, it hurts my back. This was literally dug out of the hillside, Ton. And there it is completed. And when I got there, that wooden wall was still there, and kids kicked it down. Ton. About the same year the grist mill was. We don't have an exact record for it. Inside, there was one little portion that still has a concrete floor, and a number of years ago I searched for and found the drains. I was able to drain it for a while, but it's just very wet there. This is a cider press, and in this area later on was put a canning sink. And people did work there preserving fruits and vegetables grown on the estate. You can look inside. It's wet, but you can look in there. I would like to put signage there outside just explaining what it was there for. Someone commented, well, it's just a ruin. Oh, Greece and Rome are full of ruins and attracts millions of people. Ton? My next thing is something I propose to add to a walking tour, starting from the dam, working down past the inn. And it is this line here and this line here. These are stone walls. Can everyone hear me? Or am I? Okay. These are two stone walls which separates the mill meadow from fields, pastures west of the barn. This is the Howe property of the Howe family who owned the mill. Okay. The grist mill is about here. Okay. But these two lines are very interesting, Ton, because behind the mill, you can still see the remains of a stone wall going toward Route 20. Ton. There's Snake Brook. Okay. And there's the remains of the other section of wall. There's Wayside Inn Road. They're still there. I don't know why I like it, but if you were here a month ago to listen to that man talk about stone walls, and if you enjoyed his lecture, you'll like what those stone walls are about. These were not, this was a boundary. This was a boundary. It wasn't a pile of rubble that was done because someone wanted to clear a field. Ton. And here's another remains of a stone wall, just near the chapel. There was an interesting little nascent grove of sassafras trees there. In the 17th century, the bark of the sassafras was thought to cure just about everything, and was an important item of trade, export back to Europe. I'm hoping that it'll grow bigger and have some sort of an exhibit there talking about land use and some other things. Ton. This is the country store when it was in Sudbury Center. And you can see the broken windows. I guess it was in, I don't know, fairly dilapidated state. Ton. And there it's being moved. I didn't take a picture of what it looks like now because you can see that by driving by it, but that's what Ford's good works. Ton. And next to the country store was a sawmill. I just came across plans showing that at least Ford was thinking about restoring this and putting in an overshot water wheel in there. the last thing that was used, the last type of wheel that had was a turbine wheel, but this was the remains of the Hager sawmill. Now, before I showed you some business records showing William Hager and Buckley Howe. Well, this was Hager's sawmill. Ton. Yeah, can you focus that a little bit more? Okay, this is Mill Village. This is the second mill built in Sudbury owned by Thomas and Peter Noyes, given to the town. And this is the parking lot of the Mill Village area. This was the mill that Ford, well, I should say the water rights, but the mill that Ford bought. Now, contrary to what some people believe, he did not want to build a large factory in Sudbury. He wanted to build a little factory for employing farmers in the wintertime. He was an idealist. But he needed control of all the water on Hop Brook and Sudbury. Ton. And there's an aerial view. Again, the mill would have been there. There's the overflow, Hop Brook, Snake Brook. Well, this area was Lanham Brook. And there's a group of stores. Well, the water, the mill would have been here. The water would have gone. There was the last thing that was there was a turbine, so the water would have gone literally into the mill or under the mill and would have exited somewhere here. This is the overflow. Okay, so this whole area was mill pond. Tom, will you reverse it, please? Yeah, there's the pond. The water would have gone into the mill. Most water wheels. Yes.
You're on Maple Ave, looking,
I'm sorry. Go on.
in the area of Maple Ave.
Okay. I'm looking east, or
Yeah.
sorry. Most water wheels, if they were made of wood, would be inside. Why? Because you want to keep the sun off of the wood. You wouldn't want to worry about water, it's the sun. So if you wanted to have a long-lasting water wheel, you would enclose it or eventually make it out of iron or steel. The turbines naturally were inside and they were made of steel. Tom? Next. Now, that mill also had a mill pond just off of Union Avenue. This is Codger Lane. This is the Cavicchio vegetable farms, flower farms. And there was a secondary dike just down a little bit from this, which backed the water up in here. This was all underwater. In fact, every once in a while when we get a lot of heavy rain, it still is. But this was a very shallow, but still a very large mill pond at one time. Ton. And here it is from the aerial photograph, meandering. Okay. The piece of land, Ton, that Ford couldn't get a hold of was a quarter-acre piece that the man wanted, I think, $250,000 for. This is why Henry Ford did not turn that little mill in Mill Village into a little factory. Okay. Ton. Back to Wayside Inn. This is the ice house, and I don't know, but they say Ford built the larger ice house and he enlarged the ice house pond. We use it now for storage. However, Ton, there are Henry Ford's boys, the boys' school people, cutting ice, and they were putting it into the ice house. I would like to have an exhibit there also. I think it would make an excellent walking tour. Tom? Ford also had on the property lots of animals. He had ducks, chickens, geese, horses, oxen, and this man, Fred Murray, you can see him, I think, well, at one of the various agricultural demonstrations they had there. Ton. You had a blacksmith on the premises. Ton. Yeah. He's a giant machine age, but as you know, all because he has money doesn't mean he's a genius. And I chafe when people say he was. He's receiving the highest, as you can know, the highest honor that the government of Germany could give. I'm not saying he's a Nazi, but he was an anti-Semite, and he published Protocols of the Elders of Zion. There's information about him. And that's all I can say. Order. Next. (1955). Next. I won't say too much about these because I don't know a heck of a lot about it. Ton. There's the front staircase in the front hall. Old bar is here. Ton. Now, it's a bad photograph to begin with. Okay, that's the old bar. There's the settle bench. Ton. And there are some local notaries. Fran White, a man named Purdy, Lawrence Ty, Don Nealon, taking some of the archives documents to a bank. So a lot of the stuff was saved. Ton. And there they are restoring it. Ton. Now, that's the fluorescent lights on, but there it is just before it opened. Ton. Now, before the fire, particularly after Lemon's time and during Ford's time, this is the front hallway. There's the front stairs. This is what it looked like. It was a grand place. Well, I wouldn't say grand, but it was, well, the furnishings were more expensive than probably the house saw, or I shouldn't say probably, but possibly, Ton. And this is the hall after it was restored. It's much plainer, in part because everyone knew that what was there was an accretion over time of many, many things, which may not have been there in house time. Although with the papers we have, we're slowly getting an idea of what they had. Ton. Now, here's one thing that I find very interesting. This is looking at the property from the north. There's Wayside and Road, and is there. This here was the site of an archaeological dig done in 1975, and they found what you and I call arrowheads and spear points, projectile points dating back 2,500 years that the Indians, there was an Indian dig there, the Indian site there. Whether they were living there or just working there, we don't know, but we have the report. Unfortunately, this is where in the late 80s they decided to put the new leaching field. So I don't know why, but they did. So we have a site of much greater history than just European history. Ton. And if you want to just take a walk, there's the bridge, and that site that I told you about is there. This information was initially given me by an archaeologist in Wayland, Tanya Largy. She remembers it most vividly because she never saw so much poison ivy in her whole life. They said they were giving out calamine lotion all the time. Anyone been to Cooperstown? Okay, perhaps I shouldn't say this because I'll probably get in trouble. The Cardiff Giant, does anyone know what the Cardiff Giant was? In the late 1800s, some people in upstate New York unearthed a 10-foot long ton. This is the farm ton. A petrified, what they call were the petrified remains of an ancient race of men. This grabbed the attention of many people, and many scholars weighed in and said, well, we don't know. Okay, but it turned out to be ton. The Redstone Schoolhouse is a nice schoolhouse. Mary Had a Lamb is pure fiction. Please. Some people don't like that, and I'll probably get in trouble. But Sarah Joseph Hale was one of 19th century America's most notable women. October 23rd, by an act of Congress, is National Sarah Joseph Hale Day. She wrote it and always maintained it was pure fiction. A ton. Now, if you like my aerial photographs, this is the last one. Please thank the bartender, Doug Bugley at the Wayside Inn, because he took me up there, kicking and screaming. He loves that plane. He's the bartender, and buy a drink for him and give him a big tip. That's at Marlborough Airport, which he claims has the world's smallest runway. I don't know. All I know, he comes in just over the rooftops and brakes just before the road. Okay, that's about it, I think. The next one, see if there's any more. I don't know. I think that's it. That's it. All right. Yes, I'm sorry. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer them.
Wait until I get the microphone to you.
Doesn't this work? Oh, that.
Well, while we put the lights on, I forgot to mention, please save the date, May 2nd, because we have a double feature. At 1 o'clock, we have a special presentation of...
We are the host to the Minuteman Regional Historical Society across the street at First Parish at 1 o'clock.
Thanks, Q.
Scott's for Sale is being repeated. That was done in November. But it's for historic societies, historic commissions, and Minute Militia.
And then at 3 o'clock, we have one of our trustees' daughter, whose name is Teresa Byington Carmichael, and she will present conservation of works of art. And she's another Sudbury treasure and a former resident, and she will explain the arduous task of restoration and conservation. And if you have a piece of art, fine art, you're welcome to bring it and for a little evaluation after the meeting. She has done restoration.
Questions? Richard?
Yeah, you were talking about the fruit cellar that's just to the east, I guess, of the current grist mill. Is the area there structurally sound in terms of the property? And it sounded like it was a greater than 10,000 square feet of area.
I believe it is. We had, Lee brought an engineer over there, Borg Moeller, back in the 80s. And he said you could put a 5-story building on it, but it's very wet. And that has to be ironed out. But you know, I think it's an interesting building.
You mentioned an area that had been an Indian habitation, and you said, but sadly something was placed there?
The inn put their leaching field there.
Oh,
But the 106 acres, no, I won't get in more trouble. They didn't put it anywhere, they put it right there.
A guest from Stowe.
Am I right in thinking that Ford wanted to make a village like Sturbridge Village there? I mean, that just legend?
He certainly was leaning in that direction, but don't forget, this is the time he was also building Henry Ford Museum in Greenfield Village, which was a mammoth place. We have documents showing, you know, plans for blacksmith shops, sawmills, starting with the country store. So my only thoughts are, I think he was leaning that way, but I just think being in two places at once was too much. And if you've ever seen or know about Greenfield Village, for years they had, what Ford did, he ordered his automobile dealers to collect everything that's made and send it out there to Dearborn, and they did. They had for a long time acres of stuff lying around with no idea what to do. There are some houses from Sudbury that I understand are in Dearborn. So I believe he meant to do more, but I just think age and... He once commented that it wasn't fun working at the Rougerie plant anymore. I think it's one reason why he came to the Wayside Inn. I guess with all the money he had, you didn't need too much of a reason. But I think fairly soon he simply gave up and simply concentrated there. Otherwise, why did he drop everything here? And it was probably enough here as it was. I don't know.
Were they making hard cider in that cellar and selling it? Was it a still?
It's even harder when there isn't any old line. I doubt it. Ford was a teetotaler. He didn't allow, if you made his automobiles and off job you smoked and his sociology department discovered you, you'd be fired. if you drank, you could be fired. He was, I don't know if it was him, but he was a health nut also. I shouldn't say nut. He was a health aficionado. The boys in his boys' school said when they baked bread, they weren't allowed to eat it for a day. They didn't want to give them fresh bread. I don't know why. There were a lot of fads going around at the time, but Ford seemed to be, I shouldn't say addicted, but yeah, okay, he was addicted to a lot of them. Hard cider, I wish I knew. Well, the Ford room supposedly was his apartment, and he wasn't here very much. Yes, but the Ford room, that's why it's called the Ford room. He used that for his apartment. That's the only place I know of that he did stay. He may have stayed in another house briefly, but I don't know of any. Parmenter sister's house up on Parmenter Road. There's an old house there which he restored. We have photographs of it. Oh, it's a beautiful early 18th century house, but it's now changed a bit. But he may have lived there.
Yes, Richard, I'm a little concerned when I hear about the ancient artifacts being sort of dug up and seeing some of these barns being written on and used as art projects, let's call them, for some of the children. Do you think if some signage were utilized in more obvious areas that people could appreciate these little-known facts, not just here at a meeting for the society and open members that come in, but for every person in the town of Sudbury or visitors to the Wayside Inn?
I proposed it, but I don't know. As far as signage, I can't say anything. I might get in trouble. I might say something I shouldn't say. I don't. Yes, I know. Well, that's my plan. I hope they let me do it, but who knows? They'll probably pay a... No, I'm sorry.
Of the Wayside Inn that stood in 1955, what part of it survives today? How much was destroyed in the disastrous fire?
Well, much of it was restored. Many of the timbers were still salvageable. The east wing, the old kitchen was charred, but they were using it as a gift shop during the restoration. But most of it was seriously devastated by that fire. We have more photographs, and it was a devastating fire. Many of the artifacts were salvaged. Documents were salvaged, antiques were salvaged.
As one of Sudbury's firefighters, I've been interested in the Wayside Inn, of course. It was shaped basically as it is now, and the fire started at the rear of what you call the north wing, or the ballroom wing. It was discovered by a watchman while still burning in the area of the chimney back there. And it spread very slowly through the north wing into the taproom wing, or 18th century ballroom wing, both of which were destroyed completely. And it spread forward into the original building and was left burned out in a V-shaped pattern, as you saw in your photograph. The end gables survived somewhat, and some of the structure inside survived. And it was spreading into the kitchen when it was stopped. And if you go into the kitchen now and look at the ceiling and the sidewall on the right as you walk in, it's all charred. They've shellacked it over or urethaned it over to preserve it and keep it from getting dirty, but it shows you that it was stopped in that area.
If you go in the old kitchen, you'll see the charring. It's very, very, thanks, Hal. Depressed when you talk about that.
Rich, could you say a word or two about the two floors underneath the Wayside Inn?
2 floors.
The two kitchens, working kitchens. I believe they're there because I took my students there.
Yeah, I
They were
want to
supposed
say,
be
it,
two.
but,
Oh, I thought there were two.
huh. Well, the inn has for preparing most of the food, they have a lower kitchen. And that's where much of the grunt work is done, and the final preparation is done in the upstairs kitchen, which essentially is behind what was now between the tap room and the main dining room. but they also have a laundry downstairs, a bakery, the refrigerators, the large refrigerators, which extend below the main dining room, and the bakery, which is not a great place to work at in the summertime. They have a maintenance area, for repair. I don't know how to describe the kitchen. Right?
I just wanted to make a comment about, for those of you who have seen what Rich is talking about and deterioration of parts of the Wayside Inn complex, one of the things that's deteriorating fairly seriously right now is Carding Mill Pond, and Rich has mentioned that several times. We have an opportunity to do something about that. The voters of Sudbury do. In this coming town meeting, there's Article 15, which is going to propose that that pond be dredged. It's what they call hyper-eutrophic, which means it will turn into a swamp if we do nothing, and this is the opportunity to do something about that.
Always a problem. When Carding Mill Pond was built, the people who lived downstream, the Sturtevant sued Ford. And they said, well, he's taken a very nice stream and fouled it. And Ford's lawyers remarked that they doubt it since the water emanated from the sewage beds in Marlborough. Sturtevant did win the case, but Ford appealed. Apparently, he won the appeal. But
Are there any more questions? Yes, we have one more here in the corner.
Hello, I'm from Hudson, and I don't know, are you familiar with the Goodale Estate? Hudson Marlboro line.
I've been there a few times.
And what I understood is that the same builders that built the Wayside Inn had built that house before the Wayside Inn. And from my understanding from the caretaker that's there, they might make that into a museum in a few years, the Goodale Estate, but it's a really old house.
Now, you're saying that people who built the original Wayside, early 18th century, built the what's the date of the Goodale place?
I'm not sure.
Because there was nothing on the property, the inn property, prior to 1702. Yeah, because that's when Samuel gave the property to his son David. And the deed's very specific. It doesn't mention any building at all. So
Well, this is still a few miles from the Wayside Inn.
no, I know.
And they were given like 400
saying,
acres, I think.
I'm just
but-
giving you a date of the inn. No one knows.
So it's something to look into, so,
I haven't come across any information as to who the builders were.
okay.
Goodale House was built about 1630 to 1640, way back.
I didn't know anything was there then. Wow.
Well, if there aren't any more questions, I'd like to thank Richard for coming today and presenting the little-known facts about the Wayside Inn. And it's also important, obviously, it's not just the building itself, the inn, the outbuildings, and as Frank Lyons pointed out, the historic landscape and surrounding ponds that have changed and are constantly changing. When you take a walk through the woods at the Wayside, think back on what Richard said today, and keep in mind that preservation and awareness are our first and most important tools to keep these great landmarks together. Please join us in Betsy Gottberg's wonderful assortment and array of goods that she's prepared, along with help from Betsy Cutler. So the two Betsy women have outdone themselves again. Thank you.
I have my doubts about that.